brings happiness, joy, a little bit of sadness.
I formally apologize.
You see the elders, some of them crying because they went to boarding school themselves.
Federal Indian boarding school policy will always be a significant mark of shame on American history.
I went there, no native language to be spoken at the school, or we get a paddle.
The school had a homemade electric chair.
Same thing happened to me.
They tried to let us forget our language, but we never did.
My grandparents have gone to boarding school. I went to college at a post-Indian boarding school on Indian School Road in Phoenix. And I'd like to think that my grandfather would still be here today if he was not a survivor of federal Indian boarding school. He did commit. And so this is a very deeply rooted issue.
One of the most horrific chapters in American history. You should be ashamed.
Hello, my name is Jake Frawa. I'm filling in for Andrew today. I am from the Pueblo of Jemez, a federally recognized tribe, and right now we are standing in Arizona. So Biden decided to come to the Gila River Indian community to apologize for the boarding school policies that the U.S. government implemented.
I'm heading to do something that should have been done a long time ago.
Tens of thousands of Native children were traumatized, abused, reprimanded, and even murdered to implement and assert assimilation.
More than 900 children died while in custody at these boarding schools.
It lasted for about 150 years, yet the after effects of that are still here.
But the federal government has never formally apologized until today.
Let's talk about the schools Biden's apologizing for. The primary goal of residential boarding schools, whose stated slogan was actually "Kill the Indian, Save the Man," was to cause Native children to assimilate into American culture during westward expansion, a time during which the western frontier was rife with bloody conflict between colonial armies and tribes like the Lakota, Sioux, and Apache, who fought tooth and nail to protect their land. It was in territories that were seized by colonial armies that the boarding schools began. After the schools were built, the first generation of Native children were systematically separated from their families, shipped off often hundreds of miles away, and placed into what are essentially cultural concentration camps, with the primary goal being linguicide, language death, the complete abolition of native tongues, which would stop children from being able to communicate with elders, thereby cutting off the transmission of oral history between generations.
Generations of Native children stolen, taken away to places they didn't know, with people they never met, who spoke a language they had never heard, their clothes taken off, their hair that they were told was sacred was chopped off, their name literally erased, replaced by a number.
Many kids at these schools, typically at the hands of missionaries, endured neglect, abuse, and torture, and much of the brutality administered by the schools came as a direct punishment for things like wearing traditional jewelry and, of course, uttering a word of a native language.
Children abused, emotionally, physically, and sexually abused, forced into hard labor. Some put up for adoption without the consent of their birth parents. Some left for dead in unmarked graves. And for those who did return home, they were wounded in body and in spirit.
The first school opened in 1879 in Pennsylvania, and by 1925, 83% of all school-age Native children were attending boarding schools, bringing the total number of enrollment to above 55,000 students, which gradually increased until 1978.
We have called these hearings today to begin to define the specific problems that American Indian families face in raising their children.
Following decades of activism by groups like the American Indian Movement and so forth, Congress passed the Indian Child Welfare Act, which gave Native American parents the right to refuse having their children enrolled in boarding schools. And almost as soon as this option was given, the vast majority of schools shut down due to lack of enrollment and were soon taken over by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. That being said, survivors of these schools are still among us, mostly now in their mid-70s. Here's an interview we conducted several months ago at Paradise Valley Community College in Arizona with our friend Kenneth's grandma, who is an elder from the Navajo or Diné Nation and attended boarding schools in Arizona from kindergarten to 12th grade.
I went there.
What was the name of the school?
Cottonwood Day School. Donald Leifer from Los Angeles, that was the teacher there. And he was the one that told us no native language to be spoken at the school. They have to scrub our mouths with soap, or we get a paddle, or, we kneel down on a rice. If we say something bad in Navajo, not bad, but just saying, this is who I am. My name is Nana Manson, and I'm from Blue Gap, Arizona. I was born in 1942-45. My sixth-generation grandmother raised me. She went on a long walk. It was 1864. The Navajo was forced to go down to Fort Sumner, take that longest walk. She was born on the way up there, and she survived. And then coming back, she was like about 5 years old, And that's when they have that treaty signed, 1868.
So if you even spoke any Navajo at school, there would be an actual like physical punishment.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be administered by a teacher?
No, one of them would be our dorm mate, other girls that you're going to school with or other students. When I was going to school at boarding school, I said my grandmother's name in Navajo, her Navajo name. I said that, and my dorm mate, she told me, you got to go down the canyon. And she had one of those Timeracs, and she equipped me with it. And she said, don't ever, ever say your grandmother's name. And they tried to let us forget our language, but we never did. I never did.
What was your grandmother's name in Navajo?
Astan yo nisdila. It means fat lady.
As illustrated by this interview, the legacy of residential schools is very much something that still lives with these tribal communities, not only through the lived experiences of elders, but also baked into the DNA of their descendants. I know epigenetics is a bit controversial, but I believe that trauma, especially when experienced collectively on a grand scale, is genetic and gets passed on to future generations like alcoholism, drug addiction, or dyslexia. But whether you believe that or not, there's still a direct correlation between language death and depression rates. A study done in Alberta, Canada, where the re-education policy was more or less the same as in the US, showed that suicide rates were over 6 times higher in Native communities where less than 50% of the population spoke their ancestral language. So for many Native Americans, Biden simply acknowledging this negative canon event was a very validating gesture.
The historic trauma that the tribes have gone through, we appreciated what he did.
Just hearing him talk so detailed about what the boarding schools really were, what they all did, it brought us hope. It brought me hope that he can do something for those causes, like he can actually help us. It brings joy.
But many in attendance did not share their sentiment. Midway through Biden's speech, he was crashed by pro-Palestine protesters, who bravely crossed one colonial border to protest another.
What about the people in Gaza?
Let her talk. Let her talk.
For obvious reasons, the protester was swiftly escorted off premises by police.
Oh no, let her go.
But Jake thought it would be a good idea to follow them out to get their perspective.
How does that relate to...
But first, a word from our sponsor.
As many of you know, one of the mission statements here at Channel 5 is to provide raw, unbiased coverage of news events as they unfold, with a particular emphasis of cutting through the bullshit narratives pressed by the evil mainstream media. But what if I told you there's a service that we actually use to research stories before we go into the field? Well, guess what? That's true. That service is called Ground News, a dope-ass news aggregate that compiles thousands of articles every day and ranks them in terms of bias from left to right, so you can see how different sides of the press are covering issues as they unfold. But there's even more. They also have a service called Blind Spot that allows you to see news stories not being covered by the left or the right. It's a really great way to break you out of your echo chamber. I can pull up an article right here about Biden's apology. And as you can see, 61% is right down the center, and there's pretty fair margins on the left and the right. But what I find quite interesting is only 72 news outlets are even covering the story. Compared to the other top stories of the day, Elon Musk being sued by the Philadelphia DA and Israel strikes Iran for the 3rd time, that's peanuts. So not only can Ground News show you news bias, but also magnitude of news media coverage. And of course, tracks the corporate ownership associated with the mainstream press. But full disclosure, Ground News does cost money. But what if I told you that for a limited time, you can get 50% off their annual Vantage subscription with my link? That's www.ground.news/channel5. Or hit this QR code right here. If you do that and you sign up, you get a customized homepage that learns your echo chamber and helps break you out. Again, that's www.ground.news/channel5. All right, guys, back to the res.
I'm not, a tribal member or native. I'm Chicana, I'm Mexican American, but I came out here because just yesterday I heard that Genocide Joe is going to be making an apology for the Indian boarding schools. It just seems ironic. While he's apologizing for that ethnic cleansing, that genocide that took place, at the same time he's enabling a genocide in Palestine right now.
The number of civilian deaths and the number of babies killed and children being killed and women being killed and the ones who are missing under the rubble is disgusting. That our tax dollars are paying for this, all of it. For them to be supporting a right-wing extremist regime like Netanyahu's and Israel's government is like supporting Trump. It doesn't make any sense. They're Democrats. They should be better.
What do you think a public apology on the forced assimilation of Native American children going to boarding schools, how does that relate to
Well, of course. I mean, one genocide begets another genocide, right? It's white imperialism that goes back for centuries.
It's the same kind of thing. The settlers took the water years ago in the Gila River Reservation.
A little known fact about the Colorado River is that American Indian tribes own rights to about a quarter of the river. In reality, for most tribes, they're only paper rights, not amounting to water they can actually use.
They had native plants that they lived on that were healthy, and they had a good water supply, and the settlers, very similar to what's happening in Israel, that the settlers stopped the water.
In the late 19th century, upstream users had diverted the Gila River to the point that it no longer flowed on the reservation.
And, the reservation is still, they got the water rights back, but it takes a long time to recover from all the damage that was done.
We're less than 2 weeks away from the official election day. Like, why did he wait until now to apologize?
They are very aware that they are losing the Arab and Muslim American community as a voting sector. This current dynamic 2 weeks before the election is when you finally want to give a public apology. That screams exploitation, that screams desperation.
Why wait until now to actually come to tribal lands? He hasn't done that. As far as I'm aware. I mean, you can fact check me.
I think there was maybe one time before where there was a event at the Grand Canyon.
Oh, when they declared the national monument?
Yeah.
Yeah, they wheeled him out there, gave him an ice cream cone, I'm sure.
As we covered in a previous video called Havasupai Uranium Mine Protest, the last time Biden traveled to tribal lands in Arizona was to formally promise that he would protect the tribal lands around the Grand Canyon from uranium mining, a promise that he would break less than a year later, when the federal government allowed a Canadian energy corporation to evoke a gold rush legal loophole to open a potentially toxic uranium mine directly above a freshwater aquifer that provides the Havasupai tribe with all of its drinking water, leading to health concerns and panic among tribal members.
I've seen a lot of livestock lose their lives. I've actually been scared to drink water, and I've been pretty much going into tap water, bottled waters and stuff myself, because I've heard people have been getting sick, and what we thought was clean water, being laid up in the hospitals for weeks at a time due to the contaminated waters.
And at the same time, we have still political prisoners like Leonard Peltier behind bars. He was denied clemency. Biden could change that right now if he wanted to. There's still unmarked graves all over the land here and all over the country from those Indian schools. And it's like, where are the reparations? Where's the justice? It just seems like bullshit.
Despite the similarities pointed out by the Palestine protesters, many tribal members feel iffy about their presence.
I kind of get that perspective. The younger me kind of would have felt the same in a way. But as I've gotten a little bit older and kind of understand the bigger picture a little bit, I just know it's definitely not fixing everything, but for the U.S. government to say I'm sorry for anything.
On record, right?
Yeah, in front of people. Yeah, exactly. It means a little something at least. I definitely feel like my generation took a hit. It's like my grandmas and my parents kind of shied away from teaching us the culture. Not that they were not proud of who they were. They definitely were. I always remember my great grandma always teaching me words almost like it was like a little secret, like oh, this is how you say this in Oneida or that in Oneida, and she would smile like she was like was her little resistance, teaching me words. I feel like I got it a little secondhand. That's where I still feel it. Took a little while for me to kind of be a little more bold and proud about who I am. I was always the only Indian kid in whatever school I went to, and that was kind of hard. So
it is messy. There are parts of me that honor the sentiment and the energy that comes with a public apology for those who have been waiting for millennia. And part of me is also filled with rage, therefore grief, and that is how I am processing this moment.
Many tribal leaders hoped that Biden would actually take the time to meet with them during his apology visit, as the White House had organized a speed dating style dare I say,
presidential powwow,
promising dozens of tribal leaders, no more and no less than 30 seconds of Joe time. But President Biden abruptly canceled the meeting just minutes before his speech.
Hi, I'm Kathleen Woodenknife. I am the first female president of our tribe in Rosebud, South Dakota with Sicangu Nation. Lori Walkenigal, I'm the chief of staff for President Kathleen Woodenknife. She is our first female president for the Rosebud Sioux tribe located in the south central part of South Dakota. We were invited on Wednesday to the event with the understanding that President Woodenknife would be speaking with President Biden for 30 seconds. I didn't get to do my 30 seconds, which I really wanted to do because right now we're trying to do some things with rescinding the medals of honor from the massacre that occurred on our reservation many, many years ago.
The Wounded Knee Massacre. It was one of the worst atrocities against Native Americans ever. The U.S. Army rode into South Dakota and slaughtered hundreds of Lakota men, women, and children.
19 medals were handed out to soldiers for the massacre at Wounded Knee.
I think every Indigenous tribe has the same needs. We need better health care. We need better roads. We need assistance with our education services because for every $10 that an organization gets to run on through the BIA, when a treaty tribe contracts those 638s, we end up having to run on $4 and are expected to provide the same services that they can through the Bureau. We need housing. We're still living in substandard housing where some of our people, including my mom, is living in the transitional. Now, those transitional houses were for when they were first placed on the reservations, stating that we will be transitioning you into something more sturdy, something more warm, but we don't. We have walls that are very thin, that have very little ice, what is the word? Insulation in the housings. They're not even set on foundations. They're set on wood. So our housing is a big issue. Our education is a big issue. Our law enforcement is a big issue. Our mental health is a big issue. Our physical health through IHS. Those are issues that I think that each reservation, no matter across the nation, experience because we're not funded equitably the way that other programs are funded. And the other thing that is everywhere is the meth epidemic. Losing so many of our families to meth.
Meth is an evil spirit. It's a brother to the suicide spirit and the alcohol. They're all evil spirits that want to consume our kids. They want to take our kids from us. And so it's up to us to not let that happen.
You know, within our culture, we look at the next 7 generations with what's going on with the meth addictions, the meth coming onto our reservations. People come there because it's easy for them to distribute hide it, basically. Hide on the reservation because we're a sovereign nation and our laws are different within the reservation versus off the reservation. And the meth is now mixed with fentanyl, and it's a danger. I think they call it like the white China.
Fentanyl is raining on our reservation.
Marvin Weatherwax Jr. is a tribal leader here and says much of the drug activity on his reservation stems from Mexican cartels selling to community members and using their homes, often in remote areas, as distribution hubs.
But I also think that we need to be funded at the same levels because we are a sovereign nation. In fact, we were talking about that this morning when I was in grad school. I had mentioned that sovereignty is something that we really don't have because we can define it, we can describe it, but it's our unicorn because does it really exist for us as a people?
Channel 5 Live Worldwide, Hollywood and Vine. Fuck the authority, Channel 5 News. Channel 55, we don't fuck with custers, and 5 is the best number.
Is this going to affect your vote?
Yes, it's going to affect my vote.
Was there any conversation about maybe what they're going to try to do now?
Just more of implementing the real history of what really happened and not just neglecting what happened and how the boarding schools didn't happen. They want to implement into our society today to tell the real truth and what happened.
Awesome.